Welcome to the Graceful Exit podcast. I'm Kimberlee Hoertz, founder of The Graceful Exit, created to educate, empower, and support women as they navigate divorce. Beginning with us, we are putting a stop to the divorce stigma through meaningful conversations about the emotional and endearing experience divorce often brings. My hope is that you'll follow along on this journey and join our community of women navigating divorce with grace. Hi, everybody. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing Leann Kaufman, who happens to be one of our trusted professionals within the alternative mediation space. So I will turn it over to you, Leann, if you want to do an introduction, both personal and professional, so we can get to know you.
Sure. Well, thank you, Kim. I just want to first acknowledge all the work that you're doing to help women. And I know it comes from a very personal space. And I can tell you from being in this industry for a long time that it's needed. So thank you so much for putting the work in and having the heart and the desire to do it.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I'm Leann, and I'm a certified family law specialist. I've been a practicing attorney for over 13 years now, and I have a real passion for helping people in transition. To me, divorce is not an end, it's a transition. And so I think that the transition is stressful and it's difficult, but I view my role as helping people through that part of their life that was unplanned. People don't get married to decide on divorce.
Yep.
And so that's just really where my passion is. I went to UC Irvine for my undergraduate degrees in women's studies and social ecology. So I took a lot of social psychology classes, and then obviously the intersection of being a woman in the world, spent a lot of time just studying that extra layer of how our world operates. So going into law school, I went to Chapman University, and I knew I needed to do something that helped people. I knew I couldn't be on just the transactional side of shuffling paper around. I needed to do something that had more impact and was really helping people. Trying to decide if I wanted to go to law school or be a social worker. And so it was very clear to me family law was a good space to practice because it is a helpful profession. I'm dealing with people on a daily basis. So that's a little bit about me, my educational background. And then I went right into family law when I graduated and started litigating within my first month or two. I was thankful to find a firm where they gave me my own cases and I was in court pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent the better half of 11 years litigating and representing clients and advocating for their interests. And about 2.5 years ago, made a transition fully over to mediation. I started to really evaluate what caused stress, and the stressful part is going to exist in most separations.
Yeah.
But the litigation, the time, the stress, the expense, the lack of response sometimes from the other side, having to defend yourself in certain situations, I really realized that mediation was a much better avenue if people were willing to work out their differences outside of court because it was faster, cheaper, and less stressful. And the parties had to work together to come up with their own solution. And so I've been doing exclusively mediation now for 2.5 years, but I've had it as part of my practice, but a very small part for about 7 or 8 years before that. That's a little bit about how I got into mediation.
Awesome. So help me understand. I unfortunately had to litigate with my divorce, but if somebody is coming in for a mediation session, what does that look like? And I guess what are the pros and cons of mediation versus litigation?
Yeah, I'll start with your second question first.
Yeah.
So the pros and cons, sometimes there are issues where you can't mediate, meaning a mediator is an attorney that works with the parties as a neutral. They don't represent either side, but they're helping them everything from the logistics of the paperwork to helping them understand the law and then problem solve and brainstorm possible solutions. With an attorney, that attorney is going to advocate for you and represent your own individual interests against the other spouse. And a lot of cases, even when parties have their own attorneys, they still settle. And the expectation is before you get to court that you will still try to resolve the differences that the two of you have. It's just with an attorney, it tends to be more costly
Right.
and sometimes is more adversarial. And so in mediation, a big difference is it's the parties are coming together with the mediator in the same room. I conduct my mediations with both parties present.
Mhm.
And we're talking about what's the parenting schedule going to look like? Are there constraints surrounding the parenting schedule? Somebody travels a lot for work or somebody pulls 12-hour shifts, things that we need to really brainstorm as they're still one unit in the sense of
Yeah.
parenting. And
Mhm.
so coming together in a different sense. For a mediation session, it's a little different because you can have sometimes parties do have their own individual representation
Mhm.
during mediation, but most of the time, if they do, the parties want to come to mediation without their attorneys because the goal usually is to reduce costs. And they certainly don't want to pay for three attorneys sitting in a room together.
Right.
And so the attorneys will usually stay on the perimeter, kind of the outside, still guiding and providing information. But the mediation then is with the neutral, with the mediator, guiding the parties along to resolution. But the majority of people in mediation don't have their own attorneys. The goal is to work together and come to a solution that is in everyone's best interest, considering that they will be separating.
And with most mediation sessions, I'm assuming it's a lot shorter time frame than possibly litigating. I know mine took up to 3.5 years. And my hope and I think my understanding is that mediation can often last a lot shorter time. So what is an average length of time somebody would expect when they're coming in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in mediation, I have cases where it's 2 months. I would say the average is around 4 months, 4 or 5 months. It really depends on how quickly the two parties want to move. So I have cases where perhaps they've spoken a lot before coming to me, or they've already sort of dived into some of the issues. They really just need help in a few areas. And sometimes we meet once or twice, and then it's just completing the paperwork. And other times people start the process and then summer happens or somebody gets a new job and life gets busy. So they may not see me for 2 months just from the logistics of what is happening. But I would say on average, 4 or 5 months. There are outliers. Of course, I have a case right now where we're waiting for a forensic report to
Mhm.
come back for business valuation. And so that report's going to take about 4 or 5 months. There's nothing for us to do until that report is available. But sometimes there are extrinsic factors that require it a little longer. But yes, it's
Yeah.
much faster than litigation.
Yeah, absolutely. And then how about your differentiation factor or your area of expertise? I know the fact that you have litigated prior to becoming a mediator. I know that that is extremely valuable, but what are some other areas of differentiation that you have?
Sure. So I'm a certified family law specialist.
Mhm.
And what that means is I've been certified by the state of California. It's an additional designation that less than 2% of attorneys in the state have in any area. And so we have to be recertified every 5 years. So I've held that designation since 2013. And then I would say, yes, the litigation experience, as you alluded to, because I know how much time it's going to take. I can quantify costs very easily. And then I also can see the end result because I've litigated these issues so many times that when the emotion gets in the way, it does end up being more costly. And it's normal for emotion to be in the way. I mean, this isn't a business transaction.
Mhm.
And so I try really, really hard to work with parties to get them to understand and give them their space to speak emotionally. Mediation is a space we're able to do that because, if there is something that one party needs to talk about for 10 minutes but has no legal significance, but that 10 minutes of time is going to help propel us through the remainder of what needs to be done, then we allow for that to happen. And then I think I'm a very tender person. So
Mhm.
I feel that mediation, people want to feel like it's a safe space to unpack. other things that are going on in their life. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the marriage itself. Maybe it's a parent who's sick or battling cancer. And so we have to kind of come together and address what needs to happen during that session versus what the other party wants to happen. And so it's a juggling act sometimes getting everybody to kind of align on the goals. But yeah, I
Yeah.
would say that differentiates me for sure.
And the fact that I think you have empathy for your clients. I can definitely know that firsthand from just working with you and just understanding your personal background is that you really do care about your clients and you're not there to just check the box or get to the end solution, but is really to walk the journey with them. So I very much appreciate that. And then what are some tangible advice that you could offer to these women navigating the trenches of divorce?
Sure. So one of the things that I would say is get your support team together. I mean, this is a non-legal kind, but this is what
Advice,
happens in
yes.
every case is figure out who you can rely on. And
Mhm.
there may be a shift. It may be that your sister-in-law, maybe your ex's sister, you used to be really close to, and you're hoping to get there again, but right now it's so painful that you can't rely on her in the same way. And so it's really just kind of looking around and figuring out who can I rely on? Who am I going to talk to? Talking to a lawyer is very expensive. And so it's really good to not that you can't talk about the emotional stuff in your lawyer's office or in the
Mhm.
mediator's office, but if you have someone that you can rely on, whether it's a therapist, but also friends, somebody who's going to really be there, a family member, I think that's a really critical part about, you need the support outside of the legal therapeutic side is to
Mhm.
find your allies. Another piece of, I guess, kind of advice is to ask for help. I think that as women, we're used to being super strong, and maybe we could always do rideshare on Tuesdays and it was no big deal. But on this particular Tuesday, things feel really rough. I think that you need to be able to ask for help, call the other mom, and you don't have to explain why.
Right.
Mom, parent, whoever is doing, helping you with the ride share, and just say, I know I have Tuesday, but something's come up. Could you cover for me? So I think that we have to get used to taking care of ourselves a little better through the process. And so that's what I mean by asking for help and surrounding yourself with kind of your team.
I would
Um,
agree. I think it takes a village to get through any of this, and it's
yes,
not a sprint, but it's a marathon, and it's going to take time to get through it. So the more hands in the kitchen, I think the better at this point. So
I
I,
agree. And
yeah.
I also, one of the other pieces of information I always share with people during mediation is because you're separating doesn't mean that you're going to get along famously as parents now. There's conflict among parents, whether they're married, they're divorced, or they were never married but had a child together. And so I feel that people need to understand just because you're divorcing or you're separating from that person, there's still going to be conflict. It doesn't need to be a high level of conflict, but you're still going to disagree with the other person sometimes about a parenting decision, and that is normal. So as long as you kind of go in with understanding that just because you're separating doesn't mean you're going to see eye to eye with
Mhm.
all of your parenting decisions going forward. And even if you had remained intact in your relationship and stayed married, it doesn't mean that you would see eye to eye and everything. So I think
So
just that
true.
reminder to people, and then you should vet the person you're working with, whether it's a
Mhm.
therapist, a mediator, an attorney. This is such an intimate journey for you to really make sure that you feel that you have a good rapport, that you can talk openly with that person. Recommendation is really good, but it's not always the best fit for everyone. And so I
Mhm.
think just trusting your instincts.
Yeah, I would agree. And then from an educational perspective, how much would somebody expect mediation to cost? Is there a range? Do you guys bill by retainer or how is it done?
So I bill by the hour. I'm a strong believer that people should pay for what they need and should be able to quantify what they need. There are a lot of people that we have one or two sessions, and for me personally, if they were charged a flat fee, I feel that they'd probably be overcharged for the amount of work they really needed. And
Mhm.
for another case where there might be a complicated business valuation or we're dealing with a substance abuse issue and we might have 3 or 4 mediation sessions just to resolve that, that it's going to cost more because it requires more time. So I bill by the hour. I take a retainer, but that's to work off of, and anything that isn't used is refunded then. And the retainer varies kind of depending on what the needs are of the parties and where they are in the process. Sometimes people have litigated for a while and they are wanting to move into mediation. And obviously, at that point, I don't have to pay filing fees anymore. There's not as much paperwork to complete for them. So I do an assessment based on what I think, and I try to quantify based on what I think it's going to cost.
Got it. And so over, let's say, a 4 to 5 month period, are people meeting with you weekly or monthly, or how does the check-in process flow through it?
So I schedule sessions in 2 hour blocks
Okay.
because at that point, it's kind of the length of a movie. You're sort of done, you're tired, you need a break. I'll go longer if people want to. And then if it doesn't last that long, clients are not filled, the parties are not filled.
Mhm.
But the flow is different in every case. And so I don't have where in the first session, this is what happens. I have an idea of what I'd like to happen, but I also let it organically go where it needs to if there's a pressing issue. And sometimes people are ready to come back the following week. And sometimes people say, oh, I need to talk to the estate planning attorney, or we need to look into selling our house, or we actually want to sell our house before we do anything else. We'll contact you again in a month. I like to every 2 to 3 weeks schedule if there isn't anything, because that gives people enough time to do what they need to in between if they're gathering documents or looking into anything. But it's
Mhm.
not so long where we're losing momentum. But there are times where, yes, we're meeting weekly or every other week. But usually people don't meet with me for 8 or 10 times. It's usually somewhere between 2 and 6 on average. And it gets spaced out over that period of time based on their schedules primarily and the amount of time they feel they need before
Got it.
scheduling their next session.
Okay, understood. And then one of my last questions is, I have been so privileged to have you on board as the trusted professional within the Graceful Exit. I was curious to know why you decided personally to join the Graceful Exit, the network of professionals that we do have.
So I heard about the graceful exit through another of the trusted advisors, and immediately it just sparked something in me. I've always had a passion for helping women. Even when I was in high school, I started this girls club where we would meet and talk about jobs and we'd bring speakers in. And so I feel like it's always been kind of part of who I am. But as I expressed to you, Kim, before, I feel like there's a real gap and there's a real need for this information. And so the fact that somebody, you, Kim, were taking it
Mhm.
on and putting in the blood, sweat, and tears to get us there from such a personal venture, as a professional, I felt that this would be incredibly helpful. And I also wanted the ability to feel like I was part of doing something that was helpful. And so that's really my goal, is to just be here and be helpful.
Well, I can't thank you enough for one, taking the time out to educate and just empower this community, but then two, to be a part of it and see the bigger vision and see that there's such a need for this in the market. I know part of going through firsthand is that there wasn't a community, there wasn't a sense of a team to help you through this, especially where we live in Orange County, the divorce rate being 72%. This was
Mhm.
pre-COVID. I can't
Yeah.
imagine what it is now. There just wasn't vetted resources out there. And to your point, it's important to have that personal connection with whoever you end up hiring. So I just applaud you and just am so grateful for you being part of this and sharing your just profession with us and differentiation of how you can do divorce without litigating. So I appreciate you, Leann.
Well, thank you, Kim. You as well. I appreciate you.
All right, take care.